Okay, so you've joined us for a deep dive today.
Mm-hmm.
And the material you sent over is really quite fascinating. We've got excerpts from something called the BFG Handbook.
Right.
And that's alongside the ideas behind Pope John Paul II's new evangelization.
Yeah, it's an interesting pairing, isn't it?
It really is.
Okay.
So our mission, let's say, for this deep dive is to try and connect these two. We want to understand, the core ideas of this new evangelization,
Mm-hmm.
and then explore how this BFG Handbook kind of sees itself fitting in, drawing these parallels between the Bible and, well, the Tao Te Ching. Quite a combination.
It is. You've got this significant Catholic movement about revitalizing the gospel message.
Right.
And then this handbook finding common threads with ancient Chinese philosophy. The sources, the excerpts you've got, they really help set the stage for understanding where the new evangelization actually comes from.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just like a passing idea.
Wow.
The foreword to the handbook points out John Paul II was talking about this way back in 83.
1983, yeah. Addressing Latin American bishops.
Exactly. And he called for an evangelization that's new in its ardor, new in its methods, and new in its expression. That's pretty specific, isn't it?
Yeah.
What was he really getting at with that focus on new?
That's the key question, really. It wasn't about changing the core message, the gospel itself. It was more a recognition that the world had changed.
Okay.
How people were receiving or maybe not receiving the message, it needed a fresh approach. And if you look at his 1990 encyclical Redemptoris Missio.
Right. That's the big papal letter.
Exactly. It digs much deeper into this. Redemptoris Missio really hammers home the urgency of missionary activity, calling for a renewed commitment. It builds on Paul VI's work, Evangelii Nuntiandi, and you can even see threads leading towards Pope Francis' Evangelii Gaudium later on.
So the newness is about adapting, re-engaging in a more dynamic way.
Precisely. It's about relevance and energy.
Okay, so the BFG Handbook then sees itself as jumping into that stream.
Mm-hmm.
The foreword says it's a contribution to the mission of the new evangelization, aiming to actually be that new in ardor methods and expression.
Exactly. And the collaboration behind it is interesting, too, isn't it? You've got Keith, who's Vietnamese-American,
Right.
and Archbishop Emeritus Sylvain Lavoie, Canadian. That mix itself kind of speaks to a new way, bringing different perspectives together.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not just one cultural lens. And the structure they describe sounds, well, pretty novel. Daily reflections, starting with the Tao Te Ching.
Right.
Then Keith finds parallels or resonances in the Bible, Old and New Testaments. And then Archbishop Lavoie adds scriptural commentary. It's like a 3-layer approach. That definitely feels like a new method.
It really does. And the foreword explicitly links this to facilitating a fresh encounter with Jesus Christ. That phrase, as you said, John Paul II used it.
Ah, okay.
The idea seems to be that looking at familiar Christian themes through this different lens, the Taoist wisdom might spark something new, a renewed sense of understanding, maybe?
Making the familiar feel fresh again.
Precise.
And it seems designed for, now, the introduction mentions the format. 81 short daily readings. It even kind of acknowledges shorter attention spans.
Yeah, it does.
Advising people to slow down, stop, calm down, pause. Little by little, just 1 page a day. It sounds almost like a countercultural way to read.
It really does. It pushes back against that information overload we all feel. And there's that emphasis on waiting patiently for the gift of the Word and of the Spirit.
Okay, so that brings us to the core idea, right? The handbook's main premise, that the Bible and the Tao Te Ching, despite being worlds apart in origin, actually shares some profound spiritual principles.
Exactly. Which, as the introduction admits, might sound a bit surprising at first.
Yeah, I can see people being skeptical, different times, cultures, one's religious, one's maybe more philosophical. How do they even start to connect them? Did the author talk about how he saw this?
The introduction does touch on that. It mentions the author's, Keith's, personal journey. It wasn't like an academic exercise from the start, but more a gradual realization through his own exploration.
Okay, so it grew organically for him.
That's the sense you get, yeah. Which lends it a bit more authenticity, perhaps, not just forcing square pegs into round holes,
Right. And one of the big examples they give is this parallel between living in the Spirit from the Bible and this Taoist concept, Wei Wu Wei, which means action without action. That sounds pretty paradoxical.
It does, but the handbook explains it as less about doing nothing and more about aligning your actions with a higher power or the natural flow of things, the Tao, the way of the universe. So instead of forcing things, acting out of ego, you cooperate. The parallel drawn is that living in the Spirit is similar yielding to God's guidance, working with God's will. It's about a deeper action that comes from trust and surrender.
So achieving more by letting go.
Kind of, yeah. Less about frantic effort, more about being in tune. Skillful, effortless action that comes from connecting to something bigger.
That's interesting. They also talk about living in the present moment, right? Both traditions emphasizing that, not worrying excessively about the future.
Absolutely. And that definitely feels countercultural today, doesn't it? We're all about planning, 5-year plans, worrying about what's next.
Totally.
Both the Bible and the Tao Te Ching, in their own ways, suggest real peace comes from being fully present. You could see it as trust in God's provision.
Right.
Or from the Taoist side, as harmony with how things naturally unfold, grounding yourself in the now.
So the BFG Handbook is positioned as a sort of roadmap then.
Yeah.
A guide to realizing we're built for greatness, but maybe not greatness in the usual worldly sense.
Exactly. Not about fame or fortune, but about finding and following that inner flow. God's spirit, the Tao, whatever language resonates, a different kind of success.
And it's personal too. The intro says the path, the outcome, it'll look different for everyone.
Right. The key is trusting the journey itself. There's that line, if you take care of the journey, the destination will take care of itself. It's about faith in the process.
Okay, let's maybe dig into the Tao Te Ching itself a bit more. The intro gives some background, different title translations, Laos as the traditional author.
Though it acknowledges the scholarly debate about whether one person actually wrote it.
Right, but that doesn't really lessen its impact, does it? Why do you think this ancient Chinese text has had such staying power?
Well, it probably comes down to the depth and simplicity of its wisdom. It's about living well, finding balance. As the intro notes, 81 short chapters. They touch on everything from leadership to just, well, personal peace.
And it's hugely influential.
Immensely. Foundational in China, translated countless times. It seems to offer insights that cut across cultural lines, focusing on these core principles. Balance, simplicity, non-interference,
And the structure 2 parts, the Tao and the Tet.
Yeah. The Tao is described as like the fundamental nature of everything, the source. And the Te is its virtue, its power, something you can cultivate within yourself.
And the intro connects that to the Christian idea of the way of God by the power of the Holy Spirit. That seems like a pretty direct bridge they're trying to build.
It's very intentional. The author knows concepts like the Tao might sound, well, strange to Christian ears.
Sure.
So by linking it to familiar language the way the Spirit's power, he's suggesting, look, maybe these are different ways of pointing to the same underlying reality.
Trying to show it's not necessarily contradictory, but maybe complementary.
Exactly, that the wisdom in the Tao might echo God's wisdom found in the Bible. He mentions using Christian terms, finding parallel scriptures. It's a clear methodology to make it accessible for Christians and non-Christians alike, really.
So if someone picks this up, how should they actually use it? Sounds like you shouldn't just blaze through it.
Definitely not. The introduction is quite clear. Don't rush. Read 1 chapter a day. Treat it like an 81-day journey.
Like a retreat almost.
In a way, yeah. Find a quiet space. Be open. And crucially, they suggest prayer or meditation after reading each day. Let it sink in.
Contemplative reading, not just intellectual.
Precisely. It's about absorption, resonance.
And they mention journaling too, keeping track of thoughts.
Yeah, and actively looking for ways to apply the ideas. That practical application seems key. It's not just about thinking differently, but being differently.
Trying out this wei-wu-wei thing in your daily life, maybe?
Could be. Or focusing on the present moment when you feel anxious. The idea is to experience the principles. They even suggest a kind of spiritual inventory at the end of the 81 days.
To see what's actually changed. Thoughts, actions, peace of mind.
Exactly. It emphasizes tangible growth.
Okay, let's circle back then to Pope John Paul II. His role in shaping this new evangelization seems absolutely central. The materials really highlight his vision.
Oh, completely. It wasn't just a phrase he coined. His papacy was marked by this passionate call for renewal, especially in places where Christianity had deep roots, but seemed to be, well, losing energy.
Like traditionally Christian regions.
Yes. He kept stressing the need for these new methods, ardor, and expressions, and personal witness that was huge for him. How do you communicate faith effectively today?
And he saw it as a major priority, right? Especially heading towards the new millennium. The sources mention unity being crucial for him too. Ecumenical dialogue, interreligious dialogue. Why was unity so tied to evangelization for him?
Because for John Paul II, a divided Christianity was basically a scandal. It undermined the very message of love and reconciliation the gospel proclaims. How can you effectively share that message if you yourselves are fractured?
Right, it's a credibility issue.
Exactly. He saw Christian unity not just as like a nice theological goal, but a practical necessity for the mission. A united church speaks with a stronger, more convincing voice.
So how does a handbook like the BFG, which uses a non-Christian text, fit with that specific concern for unity and evangelization?
It does. But Redemptoris Missio, that encyclical, provides the theological space for it. It recognized the need to adapt, to communicate the gospel in ways that connect with different cultures, different ways of thinking.
So the idea wasn't that the faith itself was the problem, but how it was being communicated.
That seems to be the argument presented here, yes. A crisis of communication, maybe, not belief. Traditional methods weren't always enough anymore. Maybe new handbooks, new tools were needed to bridge gaps.
And the BFG Handbook is presented as one of those tools, using this shared universal language of truth, as they put it, found in both traditions, to connect across cultures and faiths. Not mixing religions, but finding common ground to start a conversation, offering a fresh angle on the Christian message.
Precisely. Build bridges, foster understanding by highlighting shared principles, not getting bogged down only in differences. The text suggests this kind of approach is vital for the gospel to be heard clearly today. Without it, the church risks.
There's that really powerful quote from John Paul II included. I sense that the moment has come to commit all of the church's energies to a new evangelization.
Yeah.
No believer in Christ, no institution of the church can avoid this supreme duty to proclaim Christ to all peoples. Wow, that's strong language. Urgency.
It really is. And the text connects the BFG Handbook's aim for unity directly back to the historical divisions, like the Reformation.
Right.
Saying the handbook hopes to help unite us under a single voice, restoring the truth for the new evangelization. Especially now, given everything going on globally. And then they include John 17.21.
That they may all be one, so that the world may believe.
Exactly. Unity as a prerequisite for belief.
Okay, finally, there's that really striking quote, almost dramatic, from Cardinal Wojtyla before he was Pope back in 78.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Talking about humanity facing the greatest historical confrontation. The church versus the anti-church. The gospel versus the anti-gospel.
It's a very stark assessment, isn't it? He voiced concern that many people, even within Christian communities, didn't fully grasp the scale of this spiritual conflict.
And he saw it as part of God's plan.
He frames it that way, yeah. Within divine providence, a test for the church, a test of 2,000 years of culture and Christian civilization, and what that means for human dignity, rights. It certainly gives a heavy backdrop to his later focus on the new evangelization as a necessary response.
Wow. Okay, so pulling it all together, this BFG Handbook, it's not just like an interesting academic pairing. It's being presented as a deliberate response to that big call for a new evangelization.
That's how the sources frame it, yes.
Trying to bridge these ancient wisdom traditions, Taoism and Christianity, to offer a fresh perspective, aiming for unity, aiming for that new ardor method expression.
Exactly. Finding those underlying harmonies, presenting the core message in a potentially more resonant way for today.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is something like this. How could exploring wisdom from traditions that seem, really different on the surface, how might that actually deepen your own understanding of spirituality or faith? What does it mean to engage with these timeless truths in our world right now?
Yeah, that's a good question to ponder.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.